Hello, I'm Barbara Lucas, and welcome to the Green Room. Our guest today is Molly Kleinman, Chair of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. By day, Molly is the Program Manager of the Science, Technology, and Public Policy Program at the University of Michigan Ford School of Public Policy. She also co-hosts Ann Arbor AF, a podcast about Ann Arbor politics and policy. She's here to talk with us today about reducing reliance on car travel. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So when we talk about reducing reliance on cars, I think a lot of people automatically think about electrifying our car system, but there's also some issues with just relying on electric cars. For instance, we'll still have all that pavement devoted to cars. What are some environmental issues with that amount of pavement?
Yeah, so a big one is the heat island effect. This is something I think has been on people's minds a lot this summer when we hear about the heat waves that have been happening and how there's some real temperature differentials depending on which part of a city you're in and how much pavement there is versus how much tree canopy or other green space. In general, designing for cars is just really inefficient. It's a really inefficient use of space. And so that has a lot of different knock-on effects for climate that go well beyond the fuel that cars use.
Mm-hmm. Then there's the issue of the impervious surfaces with runoff and flooding, right?
That's right. As our weather events get more extreme, we're more likely to see flooding. And the more you pave the land, the fewer places there are for the water to go. And so that's just going to exacerbate the flooding that we're already starting to see as our weather gets more extreme.
And then we've got congestion, right? I hear there's something like 80,000 or what's the number of people that come into Ann Arbor?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, it was 85,000 people commuting into the city every day. In a city with a population of around 125, 130,000 people, that means that our population was increasing by 70% every day from people who are commuting into the city for work.
Wow.
Yeah.
I read in the paper that it said that 43% of the jobs in Michigan are in Ann Arbor. That's a huge proportion. I was really surprised by that.
It's humongous, and the job growth here is just going to continue. The university is doing great. It's a huge driver for jobs. And when people have to drive to get to work, because we also have this issue where housing is so expensive, a lot of people can't afford to live near where they work. So they're forced to travel longer distances. And if we don't have other options, that means it puts us into the situation where there's a lot of conflict between the people who feel they have to drive and have no choice, and the movement to create other ways to get people around, to get people in and out of the city, without realizing that when you're driving a car, you are the traffic. And that if we can get a lot of those folks into bus rapid transit or living closer to where they work, that would actually reduce those congestion issues.
So on June 7th, the City Council approved a plan that would address these issues. What was the name of that plan?
The Ann Arbor Moving Together Comprehensive Transportation Plan update. And it was a part of the larger comprehensive planning process for the city, which is mandated by the state. And there's a transportation component, there's also a land use component, but the comprehensive transportation plan, it's the first time that the city has looked at all of transportation together. In the past, we've had a transportation plan and a non-motorized transportation plan. This is the first time the city has recognized that it's all transportation and we need to look at the system more holistically if we're really going to get to where we need to be.
Sounds like a paradigm shifter.
It really is. It really is. And this plan, I really love this plan. I think it articulates a vision for a version of Ann Arbor that I would love to live in. It's safer, it's quieter, it's easier for everyone to get around and safer for everyone to get around. And I'm really excited about this plan and what this says for what we're trying to do with our streets and with our transportation network.
A lot of it has to do with the paradigm shifting Vision Zero concept. How does that change how we look at our transportation systems?
Sure. So Vision Zero is the idea that it's possible through policy and design to make it so that there are no fatalities and no serious injuries on our roads. And it's a goal that Ann Arbor has not achieved. There are cities around the world that have achieved Vision Zero, but it's a way to recognize that people will make mistakes and we can design our roads to reduce the likelihood that those mistakes will be deadly or will be life-altering. And that's really the goal behind Vision Zero.
What do you think is the most influential factor when it comes to the seriousness of crashes?
It's speed. Research tells us that so much of it comes down to how fast the car is traveling. At 20 miles per hour, if a car hits a pedestrian, more than 95% of the pedestrians will survive. Speed that car up to 30 miles an hour and you're down to half of the people hit by that car will survive. Another 10 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, only 10% of the people will survive being hit by a car at that speed. And so much of what Vision Zero requires and so much of what you see in this new transportation plan is about slowing down car speeds for the safety of everyone on the roads. It's safer for the people in the cars too. If we can slow the cars down in places where they're likely to be around people, we can make it a lot safer.
So there's reducing the speed limits. And I love those signs that help you know what your speed limit is. Actually, it helps you know what your speed limit is, and it tells you what your own speed is,
Right.
the feedback. But also, all those signs that I saw out when I was riding around Portland that said 20 is plenty. I mean, there are places where they think that, you can still get around and go slow.
Well, Michigan, it's challenging here because the state actually govern some of those laws. We can't, by Michigan law, reduce speed limits lower than 25 miles an hour in the city. And some of the lobbying work that's happening statewide is to try and reduce those speed limits so that cities around the state can make it safer for the people in their communities.
You know how you hear about climate change being a risk multiplier? Well, recently I started thinking about speed being a risk multiplier because, like, if you're going around a blind curve and you suddenly come upon a pedestrian or bicyclist, if you're going slow, it's not nearly as dangerous as if you were going fast. And I think about that because going down Division, there's a blind curve and people pick up speed because they're going down the hill.
Yeah, that is a particular trouble spot. I know exactly where you're talking about. And I think that's a great way to talk about speed as a risk multiplier. If you're going slow enough and someone behaves unpredictably, a child darts into the road or a cyclist has to swerve around a pothole, you can stop in plenty of time and no one will be hurt. And there are a lot of ways that we can design our roads to enforce lower speeds without changing speed limits.
So what's the problem with relying solely on speed limits for decreasing driver speed?
I think a lot of transportation safety advocates tend to argue that we need more enforcement. More enforcement will help keep us safer. If more people are getting tickets for speed limits, then people won't speed so much. But that doesn't consider the fact that for many of our Black and brown neighbors, the presence of police doesn't necessarily make them safer. Mm-hmm. And I really want us to get to a place where we're thinking about a safety in our streets that doesn't rely on policing, where we can sort of think more broadly about what safety looks like. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of things we can do here in the city, even if the state never acts on changing the lowest possible speed limit, to things like narrowing lanes, creating bump outs where it shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians and it makes pedestrians more visible to drivers. And we're starting to see some of these changes around town. Many of them were considered pilots, but this transportation plan really says that we're going to do a lot more of this. And in this most recent city budget, we actually see the city starting to budget funds to start making some of these changes.
Yeah, in the plan, it says that some of the things might be approached on a less costly basis, such as putting planters in the street in certain configurations.
Yeah, there are a lot of, some people call it tactical urbanism. There are a lot of paint and post, cheap ways that you can improve safety without a total rebuild of the road. Historically, the city has taken a really opportunistic approach to making improvements for bikes and pedestrians. So we already need to fix the water main. So we're going to resurface the road anyway. So we might as well paint on a bike lane. But what that means is that we have a very disconnected set of bike lanes. We don't have a network where you can move from one part of the city to the other safely and comfortably by bike, especially if you're, for example, traveling with less confident riders. So this plan says, well, we don't have to be just opportunistic. We can do some of these things cheaply and quickly and think about the whole network so that people can move through and around the whole city more safely and comfortably without a car.
Yeah, that connectivity, I experience it every time I come down again the Division Hill onto the Broadway Bridge, because the bike lane ends and there's really no safe way to cross the bridge unless you get on the sidewalk.
That's right. And it's hard to get onto that sidewalk. Last year's Healthy Streets program, which was one of these sort of temporary attempts to make more space on the roads for people and take away some of the space from cars, they tried to do that at the Broadway Bridge, but there were a lot of confounding factors. There was some construction happening nearby, so the traffic on the bridge was actually worse than it would have been in a non-pandemic year. And all of these issues, the city's aware of them, and I think there is some desire to do some bigger fixes. Sometimes it does take a structural fix to really improve a given intersection.
And to me, it also speaks to the idea that there maybe are too many cars, because that bridge, unless you take out the bridge and start all over again, how they spent many, many years studying a connector that would go from, I guess, North Campus down to Briarwood, connect the lower town to the upper town, the two parts of Ann Arbor. So if we got more people on transit, maybe there'd be fewer cars trying to get over that bridge.
Absolutely. We have too many cars on the road already. And this is part of why the recent focus I've seen on electric vehicles, I think, is a bit of a red herring, both in terms of overall improvement to our transportation system, just the experience of it, but also in terms of our climate goals. We don't need more cars, and we don't need to keep building for cars. And in fact, if we keep building for cars, even if those cars are electric, it's not going to get us anywhere near where we need to be in terms of climate change. We really need to be configuring our spaces for just many fewer cars on the road. And it's possible to do that in a way that is pleasant and makes moving through the city way more enjoyable than it is when you're stuck in a car in traffic. But there's still a lot of resistance, I think. A lot of folks are not ready to think about what life outside of their car could look like, even if it would be a much nicer life.
Yeah, I'd like to think about some of the double positives. For instance, we've got the idea that if you have a more visually stimulating drive for a car with more trees and greenery on either side and more pedestrians walking on either side, then the cars tend to slow down because there's more to look at and it's not this huge wide open space that they feel like they can just zoom through. And I think, again, of this area, Lower Town where I live, where right now it's a lot of parking lot, especially on one side, and cars just want to get through there. Whereas when you go down Main Street, there's so much to look at. There's so many people, there's so many storefronts, there's all these trees and planters, and cars go, I personally inch through there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Parking is a huge part of the problem. Cars take up so much space, and most of the time they're sitting idle and empty. And when people talk about parking, I think sometimes it helps to think of it as car storage, and it's often free or subsidized private vehicle storage. And when you start to think about how much space in our city we've given over to free or subsidized private vehicle storage, it's like, well, what else could we be doing that would serve everyone? I think of all of the street parking downtown, for example. There's a lot of just space where cars are just sitting, where we could have more greenery, more trees, more places for rainwater to absorb, more places to pile the snow in the winter so that we can get the snow out of the sidewalk and out of the bike lane, which is where it so often ends up now. Mm-hmm. When you design around cars, you can't do anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the plan says that 1/3 of the space in downtown is devoted to cars.
Yeah, a third of the land. When I learned this number, it really blew my mind. I can think of so many better uses for that space. Not all of that space, we still have to get around, right? But we don't need to be giving that much space to cars.
And then when we have the goal of a 20-minute community where everybody can get to where they need to be in 20 minutes, errand-wise, if you've got all your land taken up by parking lots and roads, there's not much space for putting in the grocery stores and, you know.
Yeah, the grocery stores, the additional housing, the childcare, the schools, all of the things that at least in my life I need to get to most days. To be able to get to all of those things within 20 minutes by on foot or by bike. I'm lucky to live in a part of Ann Arbor where that's possible, but there are many parts of the city where that's not currently possible.
Yeah, and I suppose even if it is technically possible, not everybody's comfortable riding in traffic right next to the cars like those fearless guys.
Yeah, one of the things that the transportation plan talks about is a low stress, all ages bike network, a bike network that will work for kids, for people who are less confident, for people who are biking more slowly, either because they don't want to be sweaty when they get to work or because they're hauling a load of groceries or whatever it is. And I would say that this goes really beyond gender, that there are plenty of men in this town who are biking around with their kids who are really going to make a big difference in terms of whether they feel like they can choose their bike over their car.
And speaking of all ages, I'm getting on in years and I have a bad foot. And well, actually riding a bike is easier for me in a lot of instances than driving and parking and walking. With a bike, I can ride my bike and lock it up right where I need to go. And so if my foot's, flaring up, I much prefer to ride a bike. I just want to throw that out because
I'm really glad that you did, because I think I see this conflict a lot, and I don't think it's a real conflict where people say, oh, if you want to take away space from cars and add space for people who are biking and walking, that's ableist. You are excluding disabled people, but it ignores the many disabled people who can't drive, either because of vision impairments or because of neurological issues. There are so many people who can't drive and who will never be able to drive, who can walk, who can take the bus, who can bike, and then people like yourself for whom biking is actually preferable sometimes.
Yeah, and electric bikes are really a game changer for older people or people who have weakness for whatever reason. And three-wheeled bikes, they're very safe for older people. I mean, you're going to see me on a three-wheeled electric bike until I can't move. I'm going to be riding my bike because I love being outside. And the health aspects, supposedly I've heard that even though if you ride a bike, you tend to have a higher incidence of crashes, the health benefits are going to outweigh in terms of your life expectancy.
Yeah. I think there are big health benefits and also mood benefits. I read something recently that shortening a person's commute, so a long car commute versus a short walking commute, had the same impact on happiness as something like $100,000 raise. Some shockingly large amount of money. Wow. Was sort of how much happier you would be to trade in an hour-long car commute for a short walking commute. And Ann Arbor, it's not a huge city. We could be a place where most people could get around outside of a car most of the time. And I think we would all be much, much happier for it.
Yeah, we live only like a 20-minute walk from practically everything we need except for like a hardware store. But there's hardly anybody in my neighborhood that rides a bike.
It's tough if you live in a part of town that doesn't have a good connection for biking and walking.
Exactly.
It really does cut you off from those opportunities. And I'm hopeful that this transportation plan is going to start to address those spots in particular where there are these cut points and you can't get through on a bike, or it's really uncomfortable to get through on a bike. And hopefully we'll start to see some of those get fixed.
Well, this has been really interesting, Molly. I really appreciate your time today, but we're out of time, unfortunately. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
So for this and all our Green Room shows, go to washtenaw.org/Green Room. Thanks for joining us here in the Green Room.